Today, we're focusing on fair housing and the protections against discrimination that are in place. Essentially, equal access to housing means that everyone should have the same opportunities when it comes to renting, buying, lending, or advertising homes. This is really important because it helps ensure that no one is unfairly excluded or treated differently based on personal characteristics. Understanding these protections is key to promoting fairness and equality in housing for all. Fair housing means everyone should have equal access to housing, no matter who they are. This isn't just about renting or buying a home. It also covers lending and any services related to housing. The core idea is to prevent discrimination, making sure housing opportunities are fair and accessible to all. These protections are essential to promote equality and ensure that no one is unfairly excluded from housing options. In 1968, a landmark piece of legislation called the Federal Fair Housing Act was enacted. This act was groundbreaking because it addressed housing discrimination directly, treating it as a federal civil rights issue for the first time. Essentially, it made it illegal to discriminate in the sale, rental, or financing of housing based on certain protected characteristics. What this meant in practice was that individuals could no longer be treated unequally when trying to buy or rent a home or when seeking housing loans. The act applied to critical areas of the housing market, setting clear standards to prevent unfair treatment. Why this was so important is that it moved the fight for fair housing beyond local policies and made it a matter of national concern, backed by federal enforcement. This shift gave people a legal avenue to challenge discrimination, which was a major step toward ensuring equal housing opportunities for all. The Fair Housing Act stands as a fundamental protection that continues to shape housing rights today. Under federal law, there are 7 key characteristics that are legally protected from housing discrimination. First, race, which ensures no one is treated unfairly because of their racial identity or how others perceive their race. Then, color, which covers discrimination based on skin tone or complexion. Religion protection means people of all faiths, or even those with no religious affiliation, are safeguarded from discrimination. Sex protection includes shielding individuals from sex-based harassment and unequal treatment in housing. National origin covers a wide range of factors like ancestry, ethnicity, birthplace, language, or cultural background, ensuring fair treatment for everyone, regardless of their heritage. Familial status protects families with children under 18, including those who are pregnant or have custody arrangements, so they have equal housing opportunities. Lastly, disability protection mandates equal access to housing and requires reasonable accommodations or modifications to ensure people with disabilities are fully supported. These protections together form the foundation of fair housing and prevent discrimination in housing opportunities. Now let's talk about discrimination in rental housing, which is a critical issue to understand. It can take several forms, starting with outright refusal to rent to someone based on race, religion, disability, family status, or any other protected characteristic. Sometimes it's more subtle, like imposing different terms, such as requiring higher deposits, enforcing additional rules, or applying unequal screening standards to certain applicants. Another tactic is false availability, where the landlord might say a unit isn't available for some people, but is offered to others. Lastly, tenants can face harassment or retaliation after they request reasonable accommodations or report discriminatory behavior. Recognizing these practices is essential in protecting fair housing rights. When it comes to discrimination in home sales, it's important to know that refusing to sell a property based on someone's race, religion, sex, disability, or family status is illegal. Sellers and agents must treat all buyers equally. They can't offer different terms, prices, or information depending on who the buyer is. One common but serious issue is misrepresenting that a home is unavailable, which is actually a form of sales discrimination. Additionally, any advertising or steering that discourages certain buyers from considering a property is also against fair housing laws. These protections ensure everyone has a fair chance in the housing market. Redlining has a long and troubling history as a practice that systematically denied investment, credit, and homeownership opportunities to entire communities, primarily affecting minority neighborhoods. Essentially, maps and lending policies were used to mark these areas as risky, which effectively cut residents off from accessing mortgages and insurance. This practice didn't just harm individuals at the time. It had lasting effects by fueling segregation, driving down home values, and preventing multiple generations from building wealth through property ownership. Even today, we can see the ongoing impact of redlining reflected in persistent gaps in homeownership, neighborhood investment, and access to broader economic opportunities. Understanding this historical legacy is crucial for recognizing why fair housing and discrimination protections remain so important. Here we have a list of illegal discriminatory practices in housing that are important to understand. First, refusing to rent or sell to someone based on protected characteristics is unlawful. This also includes charging higher prices or stricter rules specifically for certain groups. Another common issue is false availability, where a unit is claimed to be unavailable when it actually is open for rent or sale. Steering is another practice to watch out for. It involves directing people towards or away from certain neighborhoods based on their characteristics. Discriminatory advertising also falls under this umbrella, meaning that listings cannot show preferences or exclusions for protected classes. Lending bias is another critical aspect, where mortgage denials or unequal loan terms based on protected traits can violate fair housing laws. Overall, these examples highlight the various ways discrimination can occur and why strong, fair housing protections are essential. Let's talk about lending discrimination, which is a critical issue in mortgage decisions. Even when borrowers seem to have similar qualifications, the way decisions are made can reflect unequal treatment. For example, in one market segment, lower-risk applicants had a 78% approval rate, while similarly qualified applicants from protected groups only had a 63% approval rate. This shows a clear disparity in outcomes. The core issue here is that even with the same credit profile, some borrowers face different odds of approval, different pricing, or less favorable loan terms. This highlights why fair housing laws and discrimination protections are so important to help ensure that everyone is treated equitably when it comes to lending. Here we're looking at the process of testing and enforcement in fair housing and discrimination protections. First, investigators conduct tests by comparing how different applicants are treated. This helps identify if there's unequal access or discriminatory behavior. Then, they gather records, witness accounts, and matched evidence to establish a clear pattern of discrimination. Finally, enforcement agencies such as HUD or courts can step in to require compliance, impose penalties, and mandate corrective actions to address these violations. This structured approach ensures that fair housing laws are not just in place, but actively upheld. Here we focus on the critical role and authority of HUD in enforcing the Fair Housing Act. HUD is responsible for receiving complaints about housing discrimination, thoroughly investigating these allegations, and working to resolve them through conciliation. This process aims to address issues fairly and efficiently before escalating further. If evidence supports that violations have occurred, HUD has the power to formally charge the case and present it before an administrative law judge. Alternatively, HUD can refer the case to the Department of Justice, which may pursue litigation in federal court to ensure compliance and justice. The three core enforcement powers of HUD are clear: investigate complaints, seek conciliation to resolve disputes, and either charge cases or refer them for legal action when necessary. These functions are fundamental to protecting fair housing rights and combating discrimination effectively. When filing a fair housing complaint, the first step is to document what happened. This means writing down important details like dates, names of people involved, specific statements, and keeping any evidence such as emails, advertisements, or lease agreements. Next, it's important to confirm that the issue involves a fair housing violation by identifying if the treatment related to a protected class, like race, disability, or family status. Once you've confirmed this, you can file your complaint with HUD or a local agency. Complaints can be submitted online, by mail, or over the phone, and should include all the relevant facts and supporting information. After filing, it's crucial to cooperate fully with the investigation, responding to any follow-up questions and providing additional documentation, witnesses, or records as requested. Finally, the process aims to reach a resolution or remedies. This could lead to a settlement, enforcement actions, compensation, policy changes, or even a hearing if necessary. Understanding these steps helps ensure your complaint is properly handled and can lead to fair outcomes. Here we'll break down the different types of penalties and legal remedies related to fair housing and discrimination protections. First, civil penalties. These are financial penalties imposed by the government, starting at over $16,000 for a first violation. They increase significantly for repeat offenses. It's important to note that these penalties are paid to the government, not the victim, serving as a deterrent against discriminatory practices. Next, actual damages. These have no cap and are meant to compensate the person who suffered real harm. This could include things like higher costs for housing, expenses related to moving, and even emotional distress. The key here is that these damages are based on evidence proving a legitimate financial or personal loss. Lastly, punitive damages are used in cases of willful or reckless misconduct. These vary in amount and are intended to punish the offender and discourage similar behavior in the future. Often, punitive damages come alongside attorney's fees and specific court orders to ensure compliance. Understanding these distinctions is crucial for grasping how legal protections enforce fair housing practices and provide remedies for those affected by discrimination. When we look beyond federal fair housing laws, state and local regulations often provide additional protections. Many states and cities expand on federal law by including more protected classes and stronger enforcement mechanisms. For example, local rules might cover factors like source of income, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, or marital status, areas not always addressed at the federal level. This means housing rights can actually be broader depending on where you live. It's crucial to always check both federal and local requirements to fully understand the scope of protections available. Remember, these stronger protections at the state and city level help make housing discrimination less likely and give people more robust tools to defend their rights. Here, we're diving into some critical issues related to fair housing in the digital age. First, algorithmic steering. This happens when recommendation tools subtly direct different users towards different neighborhoods, which can unintentionally reinforce segregation. Then, targeted ads can pose problems if online campaigns exclude certain groups based on protected characteristics or data proxies, limiting fair access to housing opportunities. Next, biased screening data is another concern. Automated tenant or buyer screening processes can end up perpetuating historical inequalities by relying on flawed or partial data. Lastly, accessibility gaps highlight the importance of ensuring that listings, forms, and tours are fully usable for people with disabilities, so no one is left out. Altogether, these factors show how technology must be carefully managed to uphold fair housing and prevent discrimination. Now let's talk about the narrow religious exemption in housing. This exemption allows religious organizations to give preference in housing they own or operate to people of the same faith. However, it's important to understand the limits of this exemption. While these organizations can make housing decisions based on religion, they are not allowed to discriminate based on race, color, national origin, sex, disability, or familial status. So, the key takeaway is that religious exemptions have specific boundaries to ensure fair housing practices and protect against discrimination in other areas. Now, let's talk about familial status protection under fair housing laws. This means housing providers are not allowed to treat families with children or pregnant applicants any differently than others. Specifically, households with children under 18, pregnant women, and people in the process of securing custody of a child are all protected groups. Unfortunately, some common violations still occur, like adults-only rules that exclude families, refusing to rent certain units, like upstairs apartments, to families with children, or charging extra fees or imposing limits just because there are kids involved. It's important to understand these protections to ensure everyone has equal access to housing without discrimination. Let's talk about the important protections related to disability accommodations and modifications in housing. First, Reasonable accommodations refer to adjustments that housing providers may need to make in their rules or policies. This ensures that a person with a disability can fully use and enjoy their home without unnecessary obstacles. Next, reasonable modifications involve physical changes to the living space. Tenants have the right to request alterations like ramps, grab bars, or lowered fixtures to make their home accessible and safe. Lastly, and very importantly, landlords cannot create extra barriers. They are prohibited from denying housing, imposing different terms, or refusing these accommodation or modification requests simply because someone has a disability. Together, these protections help ensure fair housing and prevent discrimination. Here we're looking at two key discriminatory practices in housing: steering and blockbusting. Steering involves directing buyers or renters toward or away from certain neighborhoods based on characteristics like race, religion, or national origin. This practice limits people's choices and ends up reinforcing segregation in communities. Blockbusting, on the other hand, is when sellers are pressured to sell their properties out of fear. This fear is stoked by suggesting that protected groups moving into the area will lower property values or change the character of the neighborhood. This tactic exploits prejudice for profit and ultimately destabilizes communities. Both of these practices undermine fair housing principles, which is why laws and protections are in place to prevent such discrimination. Understanding how steering and blockbusting work is essential in promoting equal housing opportunities for everyone. On this slide, we're focusing on implicit bias in housing, which refers to discrimination that occurs without explicit intent. It happens when assumptions subtly influence decisions about who is shown certain properties, who gets approved as tenants, or who is encouraged to rent or buy. For example, one common bias is showing different neighborhoods to people based on their race, family status, or even their accent. Another example is assuming that tenants with children will be noisy or damage the property, leading to unfair judgments. A third example is judging someone's reliability simply by their name, appearance, disability, or source of income. These biases may not be intentional, but they can have significant impacts on fair housing opportunities. Recognizing these implicit biases is crucial for upholding fair housing and ensuring discrimination protections are effectively applied. When working as landlords or agents, it's essential to follow best practices to ensure fairness and compliance with fair housing laws. First, always use consistent criteria by applying the same standards to every applicant. This helps to prevent any unintentional bias. Second, keep your advertisements neutral. Focus on describing the property itself rather than specifying any preferred tenant characteristics. Third, document all decisions carefully. Maintaining clear records of your screening process and communications not only keeps things organized, but also protects you if any disputes arise. Fourth, it's important to train all staff regularly on fair housing rules to ensure everyone understands and complies with these regulations. Lastly, honor accommodations by responding promptly and respectfully to any disability-related requests. These steps collectively help create a fair, respectful, and legally compliant rental process. On this slide, we're focusing on tenant rights and responsibilities, which are crucial for maintaining a healthy rental relationship. First, tenants have the right to live free from discrimination, ensuring everyone is treated fairly regardless of background. They're also entitled to safe and habitable housing, meaning the property must meet basic standards for living conditions. Timely repairs and maintenance are important too, so any issues should be addressed promptly. Additionally, reasonable accommodations should be provided when needed, especially for those with disabilities. On the flip side, tenants have responsibilities as well. Paying rent on time is fundamental to keeping the lease in good standing. Following the terms of the lease agreement is equally important, so everyone knows what's expected. Tenants should keep their unit reasonably clean to prevent damage or health hazards. If there's any damage or safety issue, reporting it promptly helps ensure it gets fixed quickly. It's important to remember that fair housing works both ways. While tenants are protected from unequal treatment, they also have clear obligations under their lease and must care for the property responsibly. Balancing rights with responsibilities creates a respectful and safe living environment for everyone involved. Now let's discuss a landmark case that significantly impacted fair housing law: Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs v. Inclusive Communities Project from 2015. In this case, discrimination was alleged because low-income housing tax credits were heavily concentrated in minority neighborhoods. This pattern effectively reinforced segregation, even though there was no explicit discriminatory intent behind the policies. The Supreme Court's key finding was that the Fair Housing Act allows for claims based on disparate impact, meaning that policies can be challenged if they result in discriminatory effects, regardless of intent. This set an important precedent, establishing that housing policies with neutral rules can still violate fair housing laws if they cause unjustified racial disparities. This case underlines the broader principle that protections against discrimination cover not just overt actions, but also those policies that reinforce inequality indirectly. When dealing with housing discrimination concerns, the first point of contact is often the HUD hotline. This service provides federal guidance and helps with complaint intake and referral support, ensuring that cases are directed appropriately. Next, local fair housing agencies play a crucial role. These regional organizations investigate complaints, offer educational resources, and connect residents to enforcement channels nearby, making the process more accessible at the community level. Legal aid resources are also vital. Tenants, applicants, and homeowners might qualify for free or low-cost legal assistance to help navigate their cases effectively. Additionally, advocacy organizations, often community-based, provide counseling, outreach, education, and hands-on support throughout the complaint process. Together, these resources form a comprehensive support system, empowering individuals with fair housing rights and protections. To sum up the key takeaways, fair housing law is designed to prevent discrimination in all aspects of housing, whether it's renting, selling, lending, or advertising. It's important to remember that protected classes cannot be treated differently under the law in any housing decision. Even policies that appear neutral on the surface can be illegal if they result in unequal impact for certain groups. Effective enforcement relies heavily on proper documentation, thorough testing, and timely complaints when issues arise. Ultimately, fair access to housing is shaped every day by the choices made by landlords, agents, lenders, and tenants alike. These points highlight the critical role we all play in promoting fairness and equality in housing. As someone involved in fair housing, your role is crucial. It starts with knowing your rights and being prepared to challenge bias whenever you encounter it. Fair housing truly depends on individuals like you who are willing to speak up and stand against discrimination. By documenting unfair practices and supporting equal access to housing, you help create a community where everyone has a fair chance. Remember, your actions can make a real difference in upholding these important protections.